The sharp click of heels echoed through the pristine corridor of Mount Sinai Hospital's 5th floor. "Are you sure he should be in charge of our most important patient?" Dr. Catherine Wellington's voice sliced through the air, cool and unmistakably condescending. Heads turned. Her words weren't whispered. They were meant to be heard. Dr. Andre Santos paused at the door to room 312. He closed his eyes briefly, took a breath, and adjusted the stethoscope around his neck. At 27, he was no stranger to questions like this. 3 years into his residency at New York's most prestigious hospital, and still, he was often doubted before he even spoke. "Dr. Wellington," Andre replied, calm and measured, "Victoria Blackwood has been under my care for 2 weeks. Since then, her vitals have improved steadily." Wellington folded her arms, her icy blue eyes narrowing on him like he was a misplaced file on a desk that should be spotless. "The Blackwood family donated $4 million to build the pediatric wing," she said coldly. "We can't afford to experiment." Andre didn't need a translation. He was the experiment in their eyes. A black doctor from a public university, on a full scholarship. Everything he touched was treated like a test. Even now, Victoria Blackwood had been in a coma for 4 months. Heiress to a real estate empire, blonde, privileged, and surrounded by family who treated hospital staff like the help, especially staff who looked like him. "With all due respect," Andre said firmly, "my training in neurology at Johns Hopkins and my specialization in head trauma speak for themselves." The mention of Johns Hopkins made Wellington visibly stiffen. That always happened. Shock at his resume, followed by subtle digs to minimize his credentials. Inside Victoria's room, morning sunlight filtered through thick designer curtains. She looked like a porcelain D. "That's enough," Wellington snapped. "The family has the right to choose who treats their daughter. Perhaps you'd be better suited to patients closer to your level of experience." The words hit like a slap. Suited. Everyone knew what she meant. Not the elite, not the insured, the discarded cases. Andre's heart sank. Not because of the insult. He'd survived worse. But because he knew Victoria was listening. And she was. Her heart rate monitor showed a faint change. Too faint for most, but clear to Andre. A message. A silent scream from a woman trapped inside her own body. And it was only the beginning. She was awake, fully conscious, but paralyzed within her own body, a silent witness to every word spoken around her, and every cutting remark about the man who cared for her more compassionately than anyone else. "Very well," Andre said quietly, slipping his stethoscope into his coat pocket. "I'll speak with Dr. Harrison about the transfer. But before I do..." He turned and looked Margaret Blackwood straight in the eyes. "I believe you should know. Victoria has been showing neurological patterns consistent with the early stages of recovery, signs that most physicians might miss. But they're there," Margaret frowned. "What exactly are you implying, Dr. Santos?" "I'm not implying anything," he replied calmly. "I'm telling you, based on my professional analysis, Victoria may be far more aware than she appears, and if that's true, then she's been listening to everything said in this room." A heavy silence followed. Richard shifted awkwardly, avoiding his sister's gaze. Margaret stared at Victoria, her expression tight. A mix of skepticism, hope, and guilt. "Is that possible?" Margaret asked. The hard edge in her voice had softened. Andre nodded. "More than you might think. Patients in prolonged comas often regain some level of awareness before physical responses return. That's why I always encourage families to speak to them like they're listening." He didn't mention that he had been talking to Victoria for weeks. about Bach concertos, the ethics of medicine, and what it felt like to be underestimated at every turn. Conversations that now made perfect sense, if she truly had been conscious all along. Dr. Wellington cleared her throat, clearly uncomfortable. Well, that's speculation. Dr. Harrison will conduct a formal assessment once the case is transferred. Andre offered a tight smile. Dr. Harrison, and the same doctor who hasn't published a single neurological study and whose last professional update on comas was 15 years ago. I'm sure Victoria will be in excellent hands. His tone was polite, but the message was lethal. Everyone in the room understood. Dr. Harrison was chosen for his ties to donors, not his medical expertise. As the Blackwoods exited, without another word, Andre lingered beside Victoria's bed. He leaned close and whispered so no one else could hear. If you can hear me, I want you to know something. I don't walk away from patients because of pressure or prejudice. And I hope when you wake up you'll remember this. Real strength isn't in wealth or legacy. It's in how we treat others when they're most vulnerable. What Andre couldn't see was the single tear that slid down Victoria's cheek. The first real movement in months. For the first time, she wasn't just enduring judgment. She was understanding what it meant to be defended not because of her last name, but in spite of it. And inside her, something stirred. The injustice she had witnessed, Andre's quiet dignity, the raw, steady compassion he had shown her when no one else believed she could hear. That rage, that realization, that hope. It sparked a neurological firestorm. A chain reaction of brain activity that no one, not even Andre, could have predicted. 3 days later, Dr. Andre Santos remained at Mount Sinai, treating other patients, smiling politely at administrators, and acting as if nothing had changed. But behind closed doors, something extraordinary was unfolding. His modest apartment had transformed into a war room covered in charts, notes, and monitor readings, a digital battleground of evidence. "You're absolutely sure about this?" asked Dr. James Wilson on a secure video call. A retired Johns Hopkins professor, Wilson wasn't just a mentor. He was the man who had once pulled a gifted kid from the Bronx into the halls of elite medicine. "Positive," Andre replied, pointing to a display of data, eye movement maps, heart rate spikes tied to specific voices, subtle pupil contractions, all carefully time-stamped and catalogued. She's been aware for at least 3 weeks, possibly longer. "And you've documented it all?" "Every frame, including her physical responses to specific people, especially during prejudiced conversations about me." What Andre didn't share, yet, was the darker truth he had uncovered. Something far worse than arrogance or ignorance. While digging through Victoria's medical history, he'd found inconsistencies that couldn't be explained by negligence alone. Medications that dulled brain activity, notes redacted, treatments delayed. Dr. Harrison, the man who replaced him, had ignored key indicators of neurological activity. Worse, he had kept Victoria on a sedative protocol that could have prolonged her coma. Back at the hospital, things were spiraling fast. Dr. Harrison, true to form, began pushing outdated treatments. Margaret Blackwood, growing impatient, demanded action. "We're running out of time," she said during one of her visits. "We need to consider more aggressive procedures." Richard chimed in. "We can bring in experimental surgeons. Fly someone in from Switzerland if we have to." Harrison, desperate to maintain favor, began nodding along. "There are options," he said vaguely. "Some new approaches to stimulate activity, but none of them new." Victoria was listening, and the fear clawing inside her was real. For the first time, she truly grasped the difference between Andre's steady, deliberate care and the dangerous ambition that now surrounded her. It was then that Andre made his move. He activated a plan he'd been quietly constructing. Using Dr. Wilson's connections and the respect he'd earned at Johns Hopkins, Andre began to gather allies, and not just medical experts. "James," he said during a late-night call, "I need you to contact Dr. Patricia Reeves at the State Medical Board and someone else, the producers of that investigative show, one on medical malpractice." Wilson hesitated. "Andre, you do realize the Blackwoods have influence. They could bury you." Andre's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of certainty. Not the calm he reserved for hospital corridors, but the resolve of someone who had been underestimated his whole life. "They might destroy my career," he said, "but I'm going to destroy something they value more, their reputation, and when I'm finished, they'll beg me to take Victoria back." Because what Andre had discovered wasn't just medical failure, it was a conspiracy. Documents revealed that the Blackwood family had pressured the hospital board to maintain Victoria's coma. As long as she remained legally incapacitated, Margaret controlled the inheritance and the empire. And Andre wasn't just planning to expose them, he was going to demolish them. It wasn't just evidence, it was a revolution, and Andre Santos had quietly been building it from the inside. What no one at Mount Sinai realized was that Andre had discovered a way to communicate with Victoria, not hypothetically but directly. Using advanced neurological stimulation techniques he'd studied at Johns Hopkins, he had initiated a basic but powerful code. Subtle hand squeezes, light sequences, reflex triggers, signals so precise most doctors wouldn't even recognize them. But Victoria had. And she had answered. On quiet nights, when sympathetic nurses helped Andre slip past hospital security, the young doctor would sit at her bedside and whisper, "Victoria, if you can hear me, I need you to know I'm building something. Your family is pushing for aggressive procedures, but I promise I won't let that happen." Her reply, two faint but deliberate squeezes of his hand, shattered any lingering doubt. She wasn't just conscious, she was ready to fight back. And this time, not as the helpless heiress, but as a woman awakened by truth and driven by justice. The plan was nearly complete. In 72 hours, the Blackwoods would be sitting in a conference room with Dr. Harrison, expecting to hear about cutting-edge procedures to fix Victoria. What they didn't expect was the bombshell Andre was preparing to Dr. Op. And this time, Victoria would speak for herself. Meanwhile, in room 312, something extraordinary was happening. The mental strength Victoria had drawn from Andre's belief in her had transformed into physical resilience. The fury, the betrayal, and the hope had triggered a neurological awakening no textbook could have predicted. Because sometimes the most unstoppable force isn't revenge. It's the bond between two people who refuse to be broken by prejudice. Thursday, 9:00 a.m., Main Auditorium, Mount Sinai Hospital. Dr. Harrison stood at the podium, posture confident, unaware his moment of disgrace was minutes away. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood," he began, "after consulting with several specialists, I believe experimental surgery, Direct stimulation of the cerebral cortex may significantly speed up Victoria's recovery. Margaret leaned forward eagerly. Finally, someone with initiative. How much longer are we going to wait? But before anyone could answer, the auditorium doors opened with a deliberate creak. Dr. Andres Santos stepped in, accompanied by 3 people who made Margaret's face drain of color. Dr. Patricia Reeves, lead investigator at the State Medical Commission. Dr. James Wilson, legendary neurologist and respected professor. And a cameraman from the nationally syndicated investigative show Medicine in Focus. "Excuse the interruption," Andre said evenly, "but I believe you're about to authorize a procedure that could cost Victoria Blackwood her life." Richard jumped from his seat. "What the hell do you think you're doing? You were removed from this case." "Actually, Tom," Dr. Reeves interjected coolly, flashing her badge. Dr. Santos submitted evidence of gross negligence and possible malpractice. "I'm legally authorized to begin a full investigation now." Harrison paled. "That's ridiculous. What evidence?" Andre didn't flinch. "Let's begin with the recordings." What followed was nothing short of devastating. Audio of Harrison admitting he hadn't studied neurology in over a decade. Financial records revealing the Blackwood family's donations were, in fact, bribes. And worst of all, medical logs proving Victoria had shown consistent signs of consciousness for weeks, ignored by Harrison and dismissed by Wellington. Margaret looked rattled. "This can't be. Victoria's been in a coma." "She was," Andre corrected, "and during that time she heard every conversation, including your discussions about keeping her under sedation for control of her inheritance." Gasps rippled through the room. Then came the final blow. Andre tapped his tablet. The screen behind him flickered to life, a live feed from room 312. There she was. Victoria Blackwood, no longer a ghostly figure surrounded by machines, but awake, sitting upright, calmly talking to a nurse about the past few months. The room fell silent. Harrison's mouth opened, but no words came. Margaret stared at the screen in disbelief. Richard sank back in his chair, visibly shaking. "She regained full consciousness 3 days ago," Andre said quietly. "But she asked us to keep it private until this meeting. She wanted you to see the truth with your own eyes." Dr. Wilson took a step forward, glaring at Harrison. 30 years in medicine, Harold, and you wanted to perform brain surgery on a conscious patient? That's not incompetence. That's criminal." Margaret scrambled for control. "You have no proof we knew any of this." Andre calmly pulled out a second folder. "Actually, I do." Inside were handwritten transcripts. Detailed notes Victoria had made after waking, every conversation, every whisper of corruption, every time her family discussed using her condition for financial gain. The cameraman captured it all. The stunned expressions, the imploding arrogance, the undeniable guilt. Then Dr. Reeves took the podium. "Dr. Harrison, you are hereby suspended, effective immediately, pending investigation. Mrs. Blackwood, our financial audit will continue, and regarding the pediatric wing donation..." She paused. "It will be returned in full until we determine whether it was part of a larger scheme of coercion." Just when it seemed it couldn't get worse for the Blackwoods, Victoria's voice rang through. "Gage, the auditorium speaker. I would like to make a public statement." All eyes turned to the screen where Victoria sat upright, gaze steady, voice unwavering. "My name is Victoria Blackwood," she began, her voice ringing clear through the auditorium speakers. "And for 4 months, I was fully conscious, but unable to speak." Gasps echoed through the room. During that time, I learned more about character than I had in my entire privileged life. I witnessed arrogance, I witnessed prejudice, but most importantly, I witnessed courage. She paused, locking eyes with the camera. "Dr. Andres Santos treated me with more dignity, intelligence, and compassion than anyone in this hospital. He didn't just save my life. He preserved my humanity when others reduced me to a liability." Margaret tried to interject, but Victoria continued, unshaken. "My family and Dr. Harrison nearly subjected me to a dangerous, unnecessary surgery. Why? Because their egos wouldn't allow them to see what Dr. Santos saw from the beginning. I was waking up, and he knew, because he cared enough to look." Harrison, now visibly panicked, stepped forward. "Victoria, you don't understand the complexities." "I understand perfectly," she cut him off coldly. "I understand that you put politics and prejudice above your oath. And I understand that without Dr. Santos's courage to challenge this toxic culture, I might be dead." Then came the final blow. Dr. Reeves stepped forward and addressed the crowd. "As of this morning, Dr. Andres Santos has been appointed Chief of Neurology at Mount Sinai. His research into altered consciousness will receive full funding from the university." A wave of applause broke the stunned silence. Margaret and Richard slipped out of the room, their reputations destroyed, their empire crumbling. Harrison was escorted out by security, his license suspended indefinitely. Cameras caught every moment of their downfall. And as André stood silently, watching it all unfold, he didn't feel triumph. He felt justice. But the story wasn't Margaret Blackwood. She faced federal charges after investigators uncovered decades of tax evasion and bribery. Half the family fortune vanished overnight. Richard fled abroad, and Margaret now lived in quiet isolation, a fallen matriarch with a tarnished name. The Blackwood legacy was no longer one of wealth and power, but of corruption and disgrace. One afternoon, Victoria sat beside André, reviewing foundation reports. "You know what impresses me most?" she said softly. "It's not the justice, it's that you changed the system." André nodded slowly. He remembered those long nights, proving himself again and again, to colleagues, to patients, to people who thought his skin tone mattered more than his talent. Now, young doctors from across the country were seeking out Mount Sinai. Not because of prestige, but because it was the one place where merit ruled. The very room where André had once been humiliated now hosted the Santos Mentorship Program, training the next generation of doctors. A plaque on the wall read, "Competence has no color, gender, or last name." Dr. Wilson, now an advisor to the foundation, often said, "André didn't just survive the system, he rewrote its DNA." The most powerful moment came a year later, when André took the stage at the National Congress of Neurology, the same conference where Dr. Harrison had once been treated like a king. Now, André was the keynote speaker. As thousands of doctors watched and cameras rolled live, he spoke with calm clarity. True strength doesn't come from tearing down those who tried to destroy you. It comes from building something so powerful, so unignorable, that they spend the rest of their lives wondering, How they ever doubted you. I faced every barrier they could throw at me, and I broke them with skill, with truth, and with excellence. From the front row, Victoria smiled through proud tears, because this wasn't just a victory, it was a blueprint. Now, when young doctors face bias, they don't quit. They ask, what would Dr. Santos do? And the answer is always the same. Work harder, learn more, be undeniable. Because the best revenge, and is being so great, they can never erase your name again. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you believe that justice is possible, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that prove sometimes what feels like your downfall is the first chapter of your greatest legacy. Because the one who laughs last is the one who rewrote the ending.